So welcome to this session entitled CKA Exam Lightning Labs. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at our new notes here. So if we go into our Series 2 Kubernetes CKA exam here, and we come down to our 2.5 Section 15 Lightning Labs here. Basically what I've done is I've created the notes that correspond to the Lightning Labs from KodeKloud. So KodeKloud, if you haven't subscribed to them, um, it would be a good investment to ensure that you get some environments that you can also kind of practice the lightning labs and the mock exams into. So what I'm basically going to do is I'm going to click on start lab. Now, just before I actually do that, one thing I want to outline is, in the previous session, what we also spoke about was, this time we're also going to use chat GPT as part of our study notes. So I'm going to create a new chat here, and it's very, very easy, and the actual interface is very, very easy to understand and get started with. And I'm going to make sure that I also have my Kubernetes documentation open beside me at the same time. So I'm going to go to my Lightning Lab here, and I'm going to click on Start Lab. So you can basically sort of see after a few moments, I've obviously registered for KodeKloud, and I'm in my account here, and I'm working through all of the actual exercises here. So our environment is up and running, and you can see in this lab, there's obviously a timer, there's a weight on each question, and there's 7 questions in this actual lab itself. So when I'm actually finished, I can click on end exam, or I could actually stop the lab completely. But I've ensured that I've kind of made the interface as big as possible, and it's a kind of good scenario to start thinking about. This is a type of scenario that you would actually see in the exam, where you'd have a timer and they'd have an end exam plus the actual questions. So let's work through. The first question basically says upgrade the current version of Kubernetes from 1.25 to 1.26 exactly using the kubeadmin utility. Make sure that the upgrade is carried out on one node at a time, starting at the control plane. So that's critically important. To minimize downtime, the deployment Gold Nginx should be scheduled on an alternative node before upgrading each node. Upgrade control plane node first and drain node 01 before upgrading it. Pods for Gold Nginx should run on the control plane node subsequently. So I'm going to go down to my commands here so this is basically question 1, upgrade cluster here. And I'm not going to explain every single command because we the actual recording would be far too long. But basically you can sort of see that I actually do have a deployment called Gold Nginx. And I'm going to just see if I actually have any taints at the moment. And I have an actual taint on the control plane, which basically says no schedule. So what I'm going to do is, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to drain my control plane here. So I'm going to make sure that I copy that in correctly. And you can see that it's starting to actually drain my control plane here. So that's my master essentially. So you can also kind of type in who am I. I realized that in these labs you're also kind of actually already the root. Now if you really had to, you could actually use sudo-i to actually go in the exam, but I don't actually need to in that case. So we run apt get, and this, you've kind of a few choices on how you actually upgrade these here. You're going to upgrade your kubeadmin, your kubelet, and your kubectl here. I'm going to run this one command because I found it much quicker, much faster. So I'm going to run all of those together. And I'm going to say, yes, I want to upgrade. And again, my advice would be that, certainly during the exam, be preparing your next command all of the time, because it really is kind of critically important. Now these, I've put in as part of the actual notes as well, where you can actually find reference to, kubeadmin upgrade these actual commands. But the kind of point of this is actually to work through the actual questions themselves. So the first thing we actually have to do is upgrade the current version of Kubernetes from 1.5 to 1.6. So you can sort of see that I'm sort of saying upgrade the plan to 1.26. And this would actually show me the plan. So the current is 1.25 and the target is 1.26. So that's basically, they're the components that would basically be upgraded for me if I was to execute that, which is what I'm going to do right now. And I'm going to come down here and I'm going to apply that. And just be kind of careful that, as you take these commands, just be careful not to kind of interrupt the actual, not to touch off the keyboard when you're actually upgrading, because it may kind of give yourself a problem during the exam. But again, this is all just, in preparation for the exam of starting to get kind of quicker, make sure, you're kind of going to the reference here in our actual Kubernetes. So, while that's kind of upgrading, I can kind of go over to our URL here. And I can just say, this is how I would actually do it. Determine which version to upgrade to, upgrading the control plane nodes and versus upgrading an actual node itself. But again, during the exam, you would not be performing that. You would have known, how to find that information really, really quickly. So, the advice is during the exam, do not be reading this for the first time. You have read it a few times and you know exactly where the actual information is. All I've basically done in these notes is, I've actually pulled that information together. So that's essentially what I've done here. So we can wait for that. And I'm just going to pause the video and come back to it when that's actually upgraded. Now that took a few moments to complete, but I'm going to continue on now with the actual rest of the required commands here. And we're going to just quickly look at ChatGPT in 1 second as well, so I can actually see that the actual the kubelet is actually in a running state. So that's positive. So what I want to do now is I just want to actually get my nodes here. And you can sort of see that I actually have control plane and it's ready. Now it's scheduled and disabled at the moment, which is okay because, I've taken it out of service for using my drain command, but now I'm basically going to bring it back into service. I'm going to get my nodes again, and you can see that, it's now in a ready state. And now I can also just do a kind of kubeadmin version. And I can sort of see my version is now 1.26. So let's sort of say, you can obviously read about these ones here, but I know that I have a taint on my control plane, so I'm going to remove that taint. And you can sort of see that it's basically untainted. So now it basically would allow some pods to run on it. So right now I can sort of see that my deployment is also on my node 1. And that's something I'd be kind of checking quite frequently. So now I'm going to move on to my node 01, and I'm actually going to, what's going to happen is the deployment's actually going to reverse and go back straight over to my control plane node. So I'm going to now go SSH into my node 01. And now I'm actually into my node 01. I'm going to run apt get update. And I'm going to let that run. And I'm going to go back to my command here, which is also here. And that's going to get it done really kind of quickly. And I'm going to sort of say, yes, I want to upgrade this, because don't forget, you're going to, for the first time that you actually basically do the lightning labs or the mock exam, kind of type of questions, you may be a little bit kind of smaller. So, don't be kind of too hard on yourself, at the start. And as you kind of, as you get up to kind of speed, it definitely will improve and get faster. So I'm going to set those on hold so that they don't it automatically upgrades. And then I'm basically going to come out of here, say exit. I'm going to just say upgrade my node here, so it actually sort of says that it's actually already upgraded really quickly, which is great. And I'm going to come in here, and I'm going to reload my service on that node. I'm going to reload my Kubernetes service here, and I'm going to just check the status of that Kubernetes service here, and you can sort of see that's also in a running state here because it's active and running. And basically, I'm going to uncordon my node here, and I'm going to come down here and I'm going to sort of say get nodes. And this is where, you can sort of see that, I'm obviously using this command like kubectl, but this is where, really at the start of this question, you really should, type in alias k is equal to kubectl, and then you could just basically use k, but just for the kind of first time, then you could do that, or you could, just do kind of the kubectl get nodes. And you can basically sort of see that, they are version 1.26, either way, whether you use the alias or whether you use kubectl. And then you can sort of see, well, where is my actual deployment now? And I can sort of say, well, my deployment is over, it's now on the actual control plane. So it's actually back over on the control plane. Now, that was a kind of really quick Lightning Lab question on how to actually upgrade your cluster. Now, if I was to go to ChatGPT, for example, so if I was to type in Kubernetes, how to upgrade control plane node, regenerates response. Okay, let me just refresh this. I can sort of say Kubernetes. Let's just try Kubernetes, how to upgrade using kube admin, because that's essentially what we're basically doing here. So sort of saying Kubernetes, how to upgrade using kubectl, and upgrading a Kubernetes cluster involves the following steps: verify the version, drain your nodes. You can sort of see it's exactly what we've just kind of run through. So it's really helping us kind of reinforce. Again, you won't have access to ChatGPT or any other AI tool available in the exam. But it's just kind of helping us kind of, upgrade plan. It's showing the, apply the version. It's just kind of outlining the actual steps that we've actually just created, and it's just kind of reinforcing what we've already been kind of discussing. Now, this is obviously picking a different version, but it's quite simple to actually, replace version with the version you want to upgrade to, right? It even tells you. But let's just, while that's kind of finishing off, let's just kind of move down because we are kind of under the clock here, and let's kind of move down onto the quick next question here. So now we're on to question 2, and basically sort of says it's setting things up. And again, you can kind of read about the actual question here, like print the name of deployment in the following namespace. So you basically have to print all of these in that kind of format and write the results out to a file. Now, this sounds very, very familiar. Again, you can kind of go to your cheat sheet here, about custom columns, and we covered the session custom columns. But this really, the easiest way to do this, is this way. So using the actual custom columns. So the first thing I want to do is kind of clear that. So what I want to do here is I want to actually get all of the actual output in a JSON format. So if you look at the actual command, you're looking at the deployment in a JSON format here. And then I want to go back to my command here. And really what I'm sort of saying here is, in that namespace, get the deployment, but using custom columns as the output. So I want the deployment, I want the meta name. I'm going to have a label called container image, and that's going to basically go into the spec template spec container. And then it's basically going to go to ready replicas, and then it's going to print out my namespace, and it's also going to sort it at the end, all of that information by the meta name. So this is, an important command to actually learn. So you can sort of see it into the terminal here. It's an important command to actually kind of learn and understand, with your custom columns because not only just for the exam, but also for your own daily job, it makes life easy. And you can sort of see here's an actual deployment. You can sort of deployment contain a replica image and the namespace. So that looks like it's done. Let's move on to question 3. And you can sort of see it's kind of set and it's up here and says a kube config file at admin kube config has been created in root CTA. There's something wrong with the configuration. Troubleshoot and fix it. Okay, so we're going to go down to question 3. With the troubleshooting section here. So this is really kind of if you actually had a kind of a type of broken kube config file, how would it work? But just kind of before I'd actually do anything, I'd just kind of, I'd run this kubectl cluster info, just make sure, the actual endpoint that's actually listening for the control plane and the port that's basically being used is 6443. That's probably just good practice just to kind of make sure that, you can actually sort of see a bit of information about it. But if I kind of go up to this file here, I can sort of see that if I go up here, I can see that there's a line here that basically sort of says my server. And this is not the same port that we just saw. So what I want to do is I want to actually go into that file. I want to remove that. I want to put 6443. That's exactly what we saw just a second ago. I want to save that file. And again, that's all just, VI. If you're unsure of VI, go and check out the session on VI as well. And it just says, just make sure that the server line is that. And then, you can basically use the cluster info with the admin and the kube admin that we just created here, and just fixed. So you can also sort of see that, it's also running. There's actually not too much on that, but it's quite in the exam. I mean, if you got something like that, like checking the port or fixing the port, checking your cluster info, checking the port, hopefully it's a kind of few easy points, to be honest. Make sure that you kind of just understand where to kind of find that information in the cluster info. Now this basically talks about, how create a new deployment, call nginx deploy with the image, one replica, next upgrade deployment using a rolling update. So this is something, that appears to be quite an easy few points as well, because all you're basically having to do is sort of say create deployment nginx deploy with the image and the replicas. So you're starting out as one. So you're kind of, just kind of coming in here and you're sort of saying, okay, so I've actually created a deployment. And then I can sort of say, okay, now what I want to do is I actually want to set the image. So I'm using the set image and kubectl, and I'm upgrading it to this version, but I'm also using the dash record to record that output. So I can sort of see, okay, well, the record flag is going to be appreciated in the future, but basically right now the image has actually been updated. So I could also sort of say here, just as a kind of confirmation, I could sort of say, I know I actually have my alias, but I could sort of say kube describe deploy, because that's the shorthand for deployment. And I could sort of say nginx dash deploy. So just to kind of reiterate that command again, it's just K, because I know I actually have an alias, and that's exactly, really what you should be doing is actually setting your K alias. Describe deploy, so your deployment, nginx deploy. Now, I haven't specified any namespace, for example, test01 or anything like that, because the question itself did not mention any namespace. It did not sort of say it's part of this namespace. So in that case, I'm just going to basically assume that it's actually in the default namespace. But I can actually sort of see here the actual image here itself is also 1.27. So it has actually been upgraded. And you can also sort of see here, you can kind of read about the actual events that happened into that deployment, and just make sure that, you don't see any errors or anything like that during the exam itself. So let's sort of say we've upgraded our deployment, which is question 4. I'm going to go to question 5. And we're around 34 minutes left of this exam to kind of complete 3 questions. So let's sort of say a new deployment called that has been deployed into the alpha namespace. However, the pod's not running. Troubleshoot and fix. It sort of says here, which would appear to be kind of a common question. The deployment should make use of a persistent volume called that to be mounted at that, and make use of an environment variable that to make use of an empty root password. Do not alter. So it says do not alter the persistent volume. So it says important here, do not alter the persistent volume. If there's any questions like this in the actual exam itself, make sure that if it says don't do it, do not do it, because you could actually waste time and you could lose points um, trying to kind of change something that they've specifically sort of said. So they may sort of say, we've already created this, or we've already created a type of secret or something, and you can basically just use it. Just use it. Again, at the end of the day, for the exam itself, you know. It's about getting through the exam as quickly as possible. It's not going to be pretty in the sense where you're not specifically meant to be kind of organizing the infrastructure or architecture like you would in a normal production environment, let's sort of say. Um, but really, what you're trying to do is trying to get through the questions as kind of quickly as possible. So if it sort of says, make use of this and just output this, just do exactly what the kind of question says. So here, I just want to kind of stop for 1 second here, and I want to kind of go back to my chat GPT here, and I want to sort of say, okay, so let's sort of say, let's create a new chat here, and let's sort of say, okay, Kubernetes, for example, Kubernetes, um, how do I create a PVC and PV? So this is like persistent volume claim plus persistent volume. So, let's sort of see what this just kind of comes back with. And so it says in Kubernetes, you can create a persistent volume claim, a persistent volume using the following steps. So define the persistent volume. Persistent volume represents a physical storage. Now, I'm not going to read through all of this. I mean, this is just, let's sort of say we're trying to kind of just incorporate a little bit of ChatGPT or any kind of AI tool into our kind of study here. But it's giving quite a really good answer here. It really is. And again, you wouldn't have access to this in the actual in the exam itself. But for learning purposes, if you kind of go down to persistent volumes here, so I actually have a link here from the kind of from the notes here, you can sort of see that between the kind of chat here, and if you kind of go and you'd kind of find the persistent volume, um, they would really, let's sort of search for persistent volume, which is here. And really, I know there's gone a few different kind of options kind of going in here, but generally it's giving you the same kind of, access modes, the host path, the capacity, the storage, and, and it's kind of saving your chat here. So, it's worth to read this. It's definitely worth to kind of read through this and be reading through this, because again, at the end of the day, what you're trying to do during these kind of um, questions are trying to kind of get faster and faster. And then I mean, this would be maybe the kind of first time that you do the Lightning Lab. Then you wouldn't have to read through it again. You'd understand exactly exactly what the AI has said to you, and also what the Kubernetes documentation has also said to you. So, I mean, depend more on the documentation, because whatever the documentation says, that's the one that you actually have access to in the exam, of course. But it's also kind of good to actually have some types of other means. So let's sort of say we can just sort of say go back to our kind of question here, and let's go back to our Lightning Lab here. And what I'm going to do first of all regarding this is I'm going to clear this, and I'm going to just sort of say, okay, let's sort of see what pods we actually have in that alpha namespace that they're referring to. And you can see that it's pending, and as the question clearly sort of says, the pods are not running, troubleshoot and fix these. Now the real problem here is that the pod is actually looking for persistent volume that doesn't exist right now. So what we're going to do is we're basically just going to see if we have any persistent volumes and persistent volume claims in our environment right now. So you can sort of see we don't really have. So it says has been applied, deployed are running, the namespace should make use of a persistent volume, which is here. So we do have a persistent volume to be mounted at that and make use of the environment variable. Okay, so really what we want to do is we want to create a new kind of persistent volume claim here. That's the required name. So I'm going to go to this here, and I'm going to create a new file. So I'm going to create this new persistent volume claim here, and this basically has all of the kind of details that it's basically looking for, into my file here, and again, just be checking that kind of information. But it's really kind of, the question is kind of trying to test to sort of see if you can actually create like a persistent volume claim here. So I'm going to save that here, and I'm going back here, and you can sort of see that I now actually create this persistent volume. I can create that, and I can go back here, and I can sort of say you can rerun my persistent volume claim here. Let's sort of see what we basically have now, and you can sort of see, well, I actually have a persistent volume claim now, that's on that volume, that's capacity, read-only access. It's basically up about eight seconds. So now if I kind of go back and I sort of say, well, get my pods now, you can sort of see that my actual pod is running. Okay. Now, one thing I want to kind of point out is also, as part of the exam as well, try and use like the controller, and that's something I kind of spoke about before. Try and learn that command kind of going forward, because it does actually, save yourself some time, especially if it was a kind of big command. But right now we're just, trying to kind of demonstrate how these kind of types of questions would kind of pull together. So it's not a real test scenario right now, and this is why you kind of get lightning labs and mock exams to kind of finalize your details. And you can also sort of say here, it also says this is something that I kind of love, that you can basically type in, you can obviously write in history here, you can do like say the last 10, and then it sort of says, if you wanted to actually rerun something from your history, you can also do colon plus that number of whatever you basically wanted to kind of do. So if I could do 46, kind of 46, you can sort of see that that's another way to do it, but also depends on which way you kind of find faster. But let's go back to our kind of our ChatGPT here, and it's after essentially kind of giving me the code here for persistent volume. It's after giving me the code here for persistent volume claim. It's talking about how to bind the PVC to the PV, and then it sort of says, at the end, you create a persistent volume and persistent volume claim in Kubernetes, So this right now, I mean, it's exactly what you would essentially do. It's the steps that you would actually do. So it's looking kind of, that it's helping us understand a little bit more kind of about whether you kind of, read my notes, or you read the Kubernetes notes, or you're studying from somewhere else. But again, every time that you kind of reread something, I mean, it also kind of reinforces what you're trying to learn here. But I mean, make sure that you understand about the fields that are part of a persistent volume and fields that are part of a persistent volume claim before you would actually attempt the exam, just to understand that for example, the access modes between both have to always be the same. So the persistent volume claim will never bind to persistent volume if these kind of access modes are different. So little things like that, just to make sure that you actually do kind of understand. And then it's just really a matter of kind of to create them, and then actually make sure that they're actually in a bound state. And that's for that question really. And then we kind of go back, and this is where we kind of go to question number kind of 6 here. And this is a question regarding etcd. Take a location of, take a backup basically of the DB on the control plane node. So again, the instructions are quite clear here. It says on the control plane node. So your only focus right now is actually on the control plane node. So and then it says troubleshoot and fix any issues. So really from the notes here, you can obviously go and you can kind of read up about how to configure and upgrade etcd for backups. I actually have a kind of nice command here, so I'm just going to clear this again just to kind of give some more real estate. And you can sort of see here where I ran this kind of etc control plane, which is the actual pod here, and that pod obviously it's part of the infrastructure for Kubernetes, so it basically is part of the kube system um, architecture. So it gets created into the kube system namespace. So just kind of make sure that you've looked at these kind of before, but when you actually describe when you describe that ECT pod, you can basically sort of see and like about your data directory, about the certificates, about the actual listening URLs. We've discussed a lot of this in the session regarding etc the backup and restore sessions. So I mean, have a look back on that kind of session, and follow your own kind of path on how you're basically going to best kind of understand and study about that. But right now, basically, what you really essentially have to do is you actually have to back it up by using a specific command here, and I've kind of put it into the notes here. You can sort of see that using CD etcd ctl API 3, using the snapshot save. So again, you can kind of do -h for snapshot -h, and you could sort of see your options. But really, you're also taking your kind of certificates that are here, and then you're outputting it here. So because it says, take a backup and make sure it goes into this location, and that's exactly what you're basically doing here. And when I run that, you can sort of see that the snapshot is also sort of saved. And if I sort of said, well, I know that in opt, I know that in opt folder, I basically have a new kind of backup here. You can sort of see that the date and time kind of matches. But basically, you can sort of see that it's being created here, and it's 4.6 meg at the moment. Now, again, this would be a kind of let's sort of say a new chat, and so sort of saying how to perform a etcd backup. And this time I haven't even put in Kubernetes, whatever, but the OpenAI is understanding here. I'm specifically meaning regarding Kubernetes here. So it's sort of saying etc is a distributed key value store used to manage configuration data of distributed systems. So it's kind of really, it's giving me kind of extra notes here that maybe slightly different to mine, or maybe different to somebody else's. But at the end of the day, the more you can study and learn about these types of things, it definitely helps you. So you would just kind of let that kind of write out, and just see how it kind of performs in the end. But basically, let's kind of go back here, and let's go back to our Lightning Lab here, and let's kind of move on to the next question, because I mean that question was quite simple. It's quite easy to just kind of do a snapshot save, and it's done. So let's move on to the final question. And this question sort of says it has a weight of 20, but so it says create a pod called that in that namespace and using the BusyBox image. So one thing I kind of noticed, and I took the CKA, the developer exam kind of 2 years ago maybe. And one thing I noticed or reading in your mind these kind of full questions, like in the sense where sort of, you basically have a pod in this namespace, and that's much quicker than me sort of saying create a pod called secret 1401 in the admin 1401 namespace, right? So that kind of shaved off, kind of 5 seconds of my exam time, and every 5 seconds makes a difference. So I need a pod in this namespace. That's it. That's all you should basically kind of concentrate with the BusyBox image. That's your kind of first task, really. Then it says the container in the pod should be called that and should sleep for that. And these are all just kind of types of little kind of tips that I certainly found, especially when you're kind of up on time. So if I was kind of creating this now, I could kind of go to my kind of notes here, and you can sort of see that you're obviously going to try and do this kind of the imperative method by basically not specifying, an actual YAML file, but you're doing it kind of on the command line and you're outputting it to a file. Now, one kind of question, um, maybe kind of different than the other. So my kind of tip here is also, for example, this is question 7. Just call it Q7. Call it Q7.yaml. For me to kind of start typing out kind of, secret, 1401-pod.yaml, it just takes a kind of few more seconds. So all I'm sort of saying is really, this is question 7. So just put Q7 or just put 7 or something. Try and find little ways to kind of shave off time every single question that you actually do. Because if you go into that exam with that kind of type of mindset to sort of say, they're not looking for, the names to be, named correctly. In this case, obviously you have to follow what they say with, the backup name. But in this case, they're not looking at that file name, so say, is that exactly what I kind of mentioned here? Because they're just looking for the pod in the namespace using a BusyBox image. That's what they're testing on. So it definitely kind of helps, just make sure that, don't kind of spend too long on that type of thing. Because again, it's not meant to be a pretty exam. It's meant to be a very quick and functional exam rather than anything. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to type in. So it says create a pod called secret 104. So I've kind of done that, a pod, and with the name of that, in the namespace that, using the image that, the container of the pod should be called secret. So admin secret is my container name, and it should sleep for that. So there's my command for the actual sleep. The container should mount read only. So there's my read only mount point here. At the path ECC secret volume. So that's mount path here. That looks correct. The secret should be mounted. Oh, it says the secret being mounted has already been created for you. So this is a perfect example where they're telling you, we've already done this part. You can check it. You can go and view it. You can, cat it if you really want. You can view it. You can describe it. You can do that stuff, but don't recreate it. Because I mean, there's no extra points for kind of doing that, and it's called that secret. So right now all I'm sort of saying is I look like I actually have all the kind of components and the parts into my file. So um, make sure that when you're kind of for each exam question, you're kind of re-verifying that you've kind of done the right thing. You actually have the name. I kind of try and break them up into the kind of different lines because it kind of just helps me, kind of understand a little bit more about like this. For example, this is a task, this is a task, this is a task, and this is a task. Rather than trying to kind of do it all together, because otherwise, it may kind of get too much. But then, once you kind of save that, you can sort of see if I kind of go back in here, and I can just, run these few commands together. Okay, so when I tried to run that, we kind of we saw we got an error here, and this may happen in the exam too. This is quite a common exam issue that may kind of come up. So the point would be that if this kind of does happen, just try to stay calm in the exam. And try to read the actual error. So basically it says this error parsing the file, converting YAML to JSON. Line 16 did not find the expected key. So it tells me here line 16 did not find the expected key. So the first thing I would probably do in this case is I would go back into my file here. So I know it's on line 16. There's something around line 16. I don't know exactly what it is right now, but I do know there's something on line 16. So I can kind of go back in here. Now, one thing that I kind of, I've shown before is you can also do kind of like set number here. And you can sort of see that this is actually line 16 because you can actually sort of see it's, line 16 here. Now, I probably already sort of see that this indentation is not correct. It's actually missing one space here. So when I've kind of copied it over from the notes, what's happened is it basically has kind of moved over the kind of volumes by kind of one place. So that's not correct. So what I need to kind of do here is I want to insert again. I want to kind of come down to that line, and I want to make sure that that's one space. So I'm kind of at the edge, one space, two space, and then that's the third space. And then this again, and this all just kind of moves over one space. So that's all I'm kind of doing here. Now, you can also kind of do your set paste command here, which probably would be a kind of better option in the exam, because when you do set paste, it should maintain the actual pasting. Um, but in this case, the actual problem here was that when I took it over from the GitHub repository file here, it kind of looks like it's actually, if I was to kind of be real kind of eagle-eye, looks like it's actually already kind of out by one space. So I'd have to kind of move that over and fix that in the file. But the kind of point is, try not if possible to kind of panic too much during the actual exam itself. Um, and try and kind of read where that actual error is. So just because it says line 16, you may be sort of saying, well, there's something wrong with this, but it could be the line after. It could actually be something kind of, technically wrong with the line after, and the kind of preceding lines that sort of say, okay, so this all looks good, and then there's an issue with the line after. So just sort of saying, let me just kind of retry that and apply it, and you can sort of see now that the alignment is absolutely correct. It's actually created my pod here, and then I can sort of say, just get my pods and describe my pod here. So I can sort of see it's definitely running. I can sort of see here, it's using the volume that's the path volume that's basically required here. It's in a running state, because if there was something wrong with this pod, it would not be in a running state. But I can describe it here, and one thing I can also sort of do here is also just make sure that that there's no issues here with the actual events here, to sort of say it could not load um, this secret or anything. Because if I was to sort of say k get secrets dash n in admin 101, you can sort of see that this command here, so get secrets in that namespace, because that's the namespace we're working in. I do sort of see my secret here. Now, it's up to you, honestly, on how much time you kind of spend, let's sort of say, believing what they've told you, right? Because, you know, this, I knew that this, because it sort of says that the secret's already been created for you, that you could go and you could, spend some time, checking out to sort of see, make sure that the secret is there, it's in the correct format, all of these type of things. But all I'm sort of saying is your job is technically to, answer the question. So spend maybe a little bit of kind of time on that, but not more than a few seconds, because every single second in this exam is absolutely critical, And again, if I kind of go back up and I sort of say a new chat and I sort of say, well, open ChatGPT, like, I mean, tell me about secrets, like tell me about secrets. And secrets mounted as volumes. Let's go to give it two. So Kubernetes is an open sourced. Okay. Secrets in Kubernetes are a way to secure, store sensitive information such as password, API keys, certificates, and make them available to the application. Secrets can be created in different ways. So the kubectl, and they can be mounted in volumes of secrets, which means the data stored in the secret can be made available to your application running in a container as a file. This allows the application to access sensitive data without exposing it to potential attackers. So, this is how you would actually create a secret here. Then it says define the volume in the spec. So it's actually writing me out the information here, or the YAML file that I require. And so see that's technically what we did. That's the exact same thing that we kind of did, and that's where this volumes here, that volumes kind of, that was basically where we actually had our issue on the file. So kind of, again, just making sure that you spend the time on where it's really necessary. You're going to have a number of questions and you're going to have a number of time. Um, and with limited time, it depends on really where you want to actually, spend the time to investigate. Because don't forget, you may have like you may have formatting issue, that may kind of take some time. And I believe another kind of good tip for people is, they also sort of say, try and get some of the easy questions um, completed, quite quickly. And if you see that's one that's, worth a low score, I know these, KodeKloud, for example, would basically maybe score these types of things differently than the real exam. But if you see that type of thing, and you sort of see, the weight, for example, let's sort of say, for example, it's only 3% for this big question, it's only 3%. Maybe there's other kind of, better questions that you could complete quicker for more marks, even though you know how to maybe kind of, do the question, just kind of um, judge up kind of really quickly which questions are actually worth the actual effort, and which ones you may sort of say, well, I leave those to the end because they're too big, and or maybe they're not worth the actual work, because you can't spend 1 hour on one question and then have a second hour to sort of complete all the rest. That scenario just won't work. You're trying to complete the kind of questions as much as possible, as quickly as possible, in the kind of correct format. So let's sort of say, okay, so let's sort of say in this kind of run through for the Lightning Lab, I've um, answered all the questions here. So I believe that, I've kind of done everything here. So I'm going to click on end exam here, and I'm going to say, are you sure you want the exam? And I'm going to say yes. Let's sort of see. And I may have one or two things that I basically need to kind of go back on and fix here. Now it does kind of look like, in this case here, we got 100%. Um, but I may have kind of one question that sort of comes up and says, it's actually, you didn't complete this one, 100% correctly of what the actual exam asked for. And that's no problem, in the sense where, this is exactly why, people do sign up to KodeKloud and these type of, providers to get practice environments. You're practicing here. This is about kind of finalizing and fine tuning exactly, how you would strategically attack the exam. That's really what you're trying to do here. Um, but using back to kind of the chat GPT, using it for the Lightning Labs the first time, and I didn't run through this, in the sense where I didn't use Chat GPT um, to kind of ever kind of run through this Lightning Lab. So right now, I mean, you'd be certainly impressed with the actual response if you were in a working environment and you were kind of trying to figure out, without you kind of going to Google or something, how to actually make secrets into a Kubernetes mounted point. I mean, it would be an impressive response here. So, and again, this is not, me advertising, Chat GPT. It's a tool that's kind of very easy to sign up to, and really what I'm trying to do is just, introduce a little bit of a study buddy into my my working. So, that's the actual Lightning Lab. So I will see you in the next session. Thank you.